Welcome to episode 4 of Ask Paul Kirtley. In this episode we're going to talk about biting insects, we're going to talk about finding water, finding enough water when we're out for a hike, we're going to talk about learning about trees and their identification, and we're also going to talk about wild food foraging and the use of particular wild foods. Well, I'm out for a walk in the northeast of England. I've stopped by this beautiful stretch of river to have a bit of a break, but also to answer some of the questions that have been coming in. There's some great questions coming in via Twitter, via Instagram. Some people are still emailing in, and also more and more people are using the SpeakPipe facility on my blog where you can leave me a voicemail. Keep using those facilities, keep sending the messages in. Remember to use the hashtag AskPaulKirtley, otherwise it's hard for me to find those questions. Keep sending them in and I'll do my best to answer them. I do feel like I'm getting through more questions now and getting the answers out to people who need them, as well as this podcast and video series helping more people with answers to common questions. So thanks for all the positive feedback that's coming in, thanks for all the questions that are coming in, and let's get stuck into the first question. Luke asks, how do you deal with biting insects when you are in woodland? Well, Luke, this is a question that bothers a lot of people. People do get concerned about biting insects. People don't like being bitten. People don't like having their blood extracted or a chunk of their flesh removed. And people are concerned about diseases as well and infections, and not to mention the itchiness of being bitten. And I'm sure you're sitting there watching this video thinking about being bitten and probably scratching yourself just thinking about it. So there are some basic things that we can do. Also, we need to keep things in perspective. A lot of the time there are some biting insects around in the summer. This is July when I'm recording this. There are biting insects around, particularly in the morning, particularly in the evening. And this is in England, in the north of England, where it's not particularly warm throughout the year. The average temperature is quite low, but you're still going to get midges, you're still going to get horseflies. Things will bite you. And it's not that regular occurrence. You know, you could completely cover yourself in clothing, you could completely cover yourself in DEET, but frankly, it's overkill in places like this. I occasionally get bitten by midges, I occasionally get bitten by horseflies. Awareness is part of it. You know, in places where you go, are you in fields where there's going to be lots of horseflies? Just think about, you know, just checking and being aware of things landing on you. That's part of it. In places where you're not going to get bitten a lot. Now, where biting insects are a real menace, west coast of Scotland in the summer, the midges can be awful. Mosquitoes in June at the height of the mosquito season in Canada, they can be awful. There we need to take some extra precautions. We need to wear midge head nets or a bug suit and make sure that those insects don't get to us, because they're absolutely relentless and they make life an absolute misery. So in places where biting insects are a real problem, I'm going to make sure I take some suitable protection with me, and that starts with a head net, or in Canada I'll take a bug suit. You might need to wear gloves, some thin leather gloves, so that you can still do things but stop the insects biting you on the hands. I don't know about you, but personally, if I get bitten on my hands, on the back of my hands, that's one of the itchiest places, and it's really, you know, it can keep you awake at night. It can be so itchy, particularly mosquito bites. I think the main thing in Scotland is having a midge head net, so having a long sleeve shirt or a jacket on and a midge head net, maybe a hat just to keep the net away from your face. Those things can make life a lot more bearable. Then when it comes on to using insect repellents, DEET certainly works, but it's fairly unpleasant. Some people say it's completely safe in terms of your health. Other people suggest it might not be. It certainly can damage equipment, it can damage leather, It can dissolve plastic because of the solvents in it. It can damage your equipment, and I prefer not to use it. Particularly, I use cameras a lot. I like photography, and DEET and cameras really don't mix very well. They melt casings, they damage lenses. So I try and avoid using DEET apart from in, say, jungle environments in the tropics where I may need that extra protection. Generally, I try and use a natural insect repellent. So Mozzie is a really good product that you can buy in the UK. Things with citronella in them, things with bog myrtle in them, they all work well, and I try and use those. Also the Nordic Summer from Scandinavia, that works well. Some people say they don't find it works very well. Personally, I find it does work very well, both with midges and with mosquitoes, and I find if I apply it I get bitten a lot less. So those are the things that I do in terms of clothing, extra clothing and extra chemical treatments, if you like. And then generally you just want to make sure that you're wearing long trousers at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day when it's cooler and the biting insects are around, and also maybe have some long sleeves that you can roll down at appropriate times. And in places where mosquitoes are a real problem, shirts such as this, for example, are too thin. You'll get bitten through this. So wear a thicker cotton shirt, or maybe even a thin Ventile smock, and that will stop them biting you through there. Further afield, places like Tanzania, in the Serengeti where I've been, where you get tsetse fly, you want to be wearing a thicker cotton shirt as well. Like the 511 shirts work well, the thicker ones, not the lightweight ones, because the flies can't bite you through the shirt. So clothing first generally, then extra clothing if they're a real menace, and then if you need to, have some insect repellent as well. And I tend towards the natural products where I can. Hopefully that helps, and don't worry, get out there and enjoy nature. Most of the time the biting insects are nowhere near as bad as you imagine they're going to be. And don't worry about being bitten occasionally, particularly not in Europe where you're not going to get any diseases carried by biting insects other than ticks, which we covered in episode 3 of Ask Paul Kirtley. So thanks for that question. On to the next one. Question 2. Stan asks, what are your favourite wild food foraged recipes throughout the different seasons? Luke Smith also asks a similar question. What are your favourite camping recipes, and what suggestions would you give for recipes involving wild or foraged food? Good questions, guys, good questions. So I'm going to leave the sort of general camping recipes aside, because that's kind of a book in itself. It's certainly not a 5-minute answer, 4 or 5-minute answer in Ask Paul Kirtley, but there's a ton of great recipes. We touched on it a little bit, I think it was in episode 2 when I talked about campfire cooking and all the wonderful things you can do there, particularly if you've got a range of different cooking utensils, including Dutch ovens. You can do everything from baking bread to roast dinners to porridge, to simple things like porridge and granola and bannocks, right through to fully leavened breads and roast beef and all sorts of things. So I think I'll probably cover that in more detail in a different format at some point, but there's a ton of different things that you can cook on a campfire. As soon as you've got a campfire and you start to understand the different woods and where you can get embers and what produces good flame and how to manage those things all at the same time, you can cook wonderful meals, better meals than you can cook at home a lot of the time. But in terms of wild foods, I love food. I really enjoy food. I enjoy all the different flavours. There's very few things that I don't enjoy eating in terms of food in general. I like subtle flavours, I like strong flavours, and I do enjoy wild food foraging from that perspective, from salads through to nuts and berries and roots. There's a whole host of different wild foods, so picking out a favourite one is quite difficult. What I should say as well is my perspective on wild foods is very much from a perspective, I come at wild foods from the perspective of what can I eat to sustain myself. A lot of modern wild food foraging, which is really quite fashionable and popular now, and I think that's fantastic that more and more people are going out and interacting with nature and rediscovering all these fantastic wild foods we have around us. But a lot of it is centred on adding to meals that we might already be having. So making a really nice salad of spring greens, for example, that isn't going to sustain you in and of itself. You're going to need to eat other things with that to get the calories, to get the fat, to get the proteins. You get lots of micronutrients from wild greens, but you're going to have to eat other stuff to get your regular sort of carbohydrate, proteins and fats. My interest really centers more on what can I eat to try and get those calories. Where can I get carbohydrates? Where can I get complex carbohydrates? Where can I get fats? Where can I get a lot of sugars at different times of the year? So in some ways, from a chefing point of view, if you like, my approach to wild foods, my core approach to wild foods is quite simplistic. It's not very cordon bleu. But I really enjoy raspberries. I think raspberries in the wild in Scotland are absolutely fantastic, absolutely superb flavours. Wild strawberries, absolutely superb flavours. And you don't need to do a lot with them. Both of you asked about recipes. Well, a lot of these things taste wonderful on their own. A bit of mint with some wild strawberries, you don't need much else. You can eat them just like that. Raspberries, you can eat them on their own. I like making elderberry cordial from wild elderberries. Great flavours, really strong fruity flavours there. I like a lot of the spring greens, lots of little subtle flavours, from spicy pepperiness of some leaves through to real lush sort of mucilage of other leaves. There's lots of great flavours. Some are not suited to our modern palate. We need to get used to them, but I've grown to really enjoy the flavours for what they are. So I really enjoy a little nibble on water pepper, on wood sorrel. I have to be careful eating sorrels. I've had a kidney stone in the past, and stone formers tend to need to limit the amount of oxalic acid they take on board, and sorrels are full of it, which is unfortunate because they taste really nice, but I do enjoy them just in limited quantities. And there's just a ton of flavors there just to be enjoyed on their own. So I like making spring salads. That'd be one of my favorite things, particularly after the winter. All the spring greens come up. Spring salads, if we're talking about sort of wild food foraging in general. And then I really enjoy the berries as we go into the late summer. Start getting the raspberries and the strawberries, and then you start getting the cowberries and the blaeberries. I love all of that side of things as well. Nuts, absolutely fantastic. And then of course we've got fungi. Chanterelles and ceps are probably amongst my favourite. They're particularly in the autumn. Absolutely wonderful flavours it's hard to beat, and it's understandable why they are still part of mainstream culinary culture now, aside from wild food foraging. So there's lots to go at. My recommendation would be just to learn slowly. If you're not so familiar with a lot of the wild foods, go out, learn some of the basics, get some of the books, have a look on my blog. If you look in the resources section of my blog, there are some recommendations there for foraging books and for field identification books. They will set you off on the right foot. Learn to understand how to recognize them, learn the flavors individually, then start combining them, and you'll have an absolute blast, have a real fantastic time discovering this world of flavors that are out there once you start foraging. So hopefully that helps. Hopes it gives you an idea of where I'm coming from generally with my interest in wild foods, but also what I enjoy from a flavor perspective as well. Thanks for the questions, guys, and on to question 3. Question 3, Primal Edge asks, I'm interested in learning about trees, including identification. Are there any authors you'd recommend? Okay, good question. Good question. Following on from the previous question, again, go to the resources section of my blog, and there are some field guides there that are recommended. I don't know where you are. You might be in the States. Judging by the way that you spelt one of your words, you may be in the US or Canada. I'm not sure where you're based. There's a lot of UK and European guides recommended on my blog, but if you want stuff for the States, look at the National Audubon Society books. They're great for the trees. They do regional tree guides. Get the one that is suited to your region and go for gold with one of those. They're really good. And then you can maybe get another guide to cross-reference with that as is necessary. Also, I run a tree and plant identification masterclass. It's open once a year. It's closed at the moment. It'll be reopened again at the end of the year. You can sign up for that that is aimed at identifying trees and plants that are useful for bushcraft and survival purposes and that you're likely to find. And it's aimed at the northern hemisphere, the northern temperate zone and the boreal forest mainly. So big swathes of wilderness areas in Europe, Eurasia, Asia and North America, as well as the UK. That's what that's really suited to. So if you're in that region and you're interested in learning more about trees and plants, then have a look at that at the end of the year when I reopen that as well. But general recommendation is get a local guidebook that's suited to your area, go out and slowly, don't try and learn everything at once, slowly but surely, look at what's common in your area and you'll quickly recognize, you go for a walk in your area and you'll start seeing the same thing over and over and over again. Learn to recognize what they are first. Then start to pick out the things that are less common but also present in your area, so that you know all of the common trees in your area, and then you can start to go down to some of the ones that are less common but still present and that may be useful to you. You're then going to have to cross-reference that with some bushcraft and survival texts or online resources so that you can see which ones of those are most useful to you. But often you'll find that some of the most common ones are also useful because people have had to learn how to use them. They're the ones that are present in a particular environment, and they're the ones that people have found uses for in different ways. So often there's quite an overlap there. Not always. There are some common trees that are not particularly useful, and there are some uncommon trees that are worth seeking out because of their particular use. But start by learning the common ones in your area, then cross-referencing with some other resources to find out what they can be used for. Hopefully that helps, and good question. A lot of people are wondering the same thing. Next question.
Hello Paul, it's Adrian. Just wondered how we would use Alexanders for food. Thank you.
Okay. Adrian, that's a specific question, but it's a good question, and I really appreciate the bushcraft questions that are coming in now that are about using resources. Fewer kit questions coming in. Still happy to answer kit questions where relevant, but I'm really liking the wild food and foraging and bushcraft uses and identification questions that are coming in, because that's really at the heart of bushcraft, learning how to use those natural resources. So Alexanders, it's part of the carrot family. That's one of the families you need to be particularly careful with because there's some extremely poisonous members of that family. So hemlock water dropwort. There's also giant hogweed in that family. There is cowbane in that family. You do need to be careful in terms of identifying them. Alexanders is one of the easier ones to recognize because unlike most of the family, which typically have white umbels, a cluster of white flowers at the top, Alexanders has yellow flowers. They also tend to be present quite early on in the year. They tend to come up quite early, and we do get them in the UK. They're not a native species. They're often around the south coast, but you also get them around rivers and canals as well, mainly in the south of England. They were introduced as a pot herb by the Romans. You get it in southern Europe as well, quite commonly, and it has quite a shiny, almost greasy looking leaf, a little bit like flat leaf parsley, and it has quite a pungent smell to it as well. It's not to everybody's taste, but you can blanch the leaves and eat them. Also the roots, which look a little bit like parsnips, as do some of the poisonous members of the family, so you have to be particularly careful that you've got it identified correctly. The roots can be used, they can be steamed, they can be boiled, they can be eaten that way, they can be sliced, and again they have quite a strong flavour. Again, not to everybody's taste, but you've got a rootstock there which can be used in a similar way to parsnip, and you've got leaves there which can be used a bit like spinach or a little bit like flat leaf parsley in moderation. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how to use it. We're a bit past the season now for Alexanders, but that should put you in good stead for looking out for those at the beginning of next spring, when they'll start to appear through to about this time of year when they're on the way out really. So hopefully that helps, Adrian. Thanks for the question. I like the specific questions. I know you've asked a couple of other specific questions, but I can only get to one on each episode. So I'll try and get to the others going forwards. Keep the questions coming in generally, everyone. And these are the sorts of questions that are really helpful. Thank you. Cheers. Last question. This is from Mike, and Mike asks by email, I'm walking in the Downs and I run out of drinking water. How do I restock my canteen? There are no running streams, but the occasional still dew pond and animal water troughs. As livestock have also drunk from these sources, is it safe to drink? I don't really want to stop and boil water, so would the readily available filter products be sufficient? Perhaps you could expand on the subject whilst on the move and not necessarily relying on base camp location for a couple of days. So that's a good question, Mike, and it touches on sort of general water purification, but your specific situation will address that. Generally, what you need to do is deal with the pathogenic organisms, and certainly that's going to be the case in your example. You're going to need to deal with protozoa and their cysts, which are quite large pathogenic organisms. They're still microscopic, but they're quite large. You're going to need to deal with bacteria, and you're going to need to deal with viruses if they're present. And as you've alluded to, boiling will kill all of those things. Bringing things to a rolling boil will kill protozoa, it will kill bacteria, and it will kill or deactivate viruses. So that's a good way, but as you say, you don't always want to be stopping and boiling whenever you need to get some more water on board. For example, I'm sat by a river here, I might want to just get some water quickly on the move and carry on with my hike. Equally, I might be paddling on this river, I might be canoeing down the river. I don't want to have to shore up, get a fire going, or get my stove out and boil water just to get some more water during the day. And then it's hot as well, it's a hot day today. I want to be drinking cool water, I don't want to be drinking tepid boiled water if I can help it. And then you've got the question of using fuel as well. Where do you get the fuel from? It might not always be available. If you're carrying fuel, you're using up valuable fuel. And then if you have a fire, you've got to clean up after you as well. So it's quite a time-consuming process and an expensive process in terms of fuel use. So we need some other options. The larger pathogenic organisms like protozoa and some of the larger bacteria, we can filter out. We can also filter out dirt where some of those pathogenic organisms could be attached to. So the first thing we want to do, if it looks at all turbid, i.e. if there's suspended matter in the water, we want to put it through a coarse filter that will remove that turbidity. A classic example is a millbank bag, but there are other methods as well where you're getting rid of it. So you're taking it from looking murky to looking relatively clear. It won't necessarily be completely uncoloured. Here the water's very peaty. In other parts of the country it's quite high in iron ore. In the water it may have a brown coloration, but as long as it's clear, that's what you're aiming for with that first stage. Now that could be part of an integral filtration unit, or it could be you could be pre-filtering with something like a millbank bag. Then you need to deal with any pathogenic organisms which are still present. You will have removed some if they were stuck to the organic material that you've removed, but you then need to deactivate the remaining pathogens. So we can use a chemical treatment, and if you're not doing anything else, the most efficient one, the most effective one is now chlorine dioxide. You can get a tablet form. The liquid form is probably more effective on a short time period. So I would get the liquid form that you have to mix because it's unstable as a solution. You have to mix the two bottles as per the instructions, leave the contact time as per the instructions, which isn't very long compared to some others, and then that will kill protozoa, it will kill bacteria, and it will deactivate viruses. So that's one way of dealing with it. The other way of dealing with it is a modern filter unit, and you can get some that are drip filters which go on the top of bottles, others which are pump filters, and others which are gravity fed filters, and they will remove the larger pathogenic organisms such as protozoa, and then you're left with having to deactivate bacteria and viruses, and there you can use a slightly less powerful chemical agent. So iodine will work well, and even chlorine will work well as long as the water's clean. Chlorine will kill bacteria and deactivate viruses. It won't deactivate protozoa, so you need to have microfiltered them first through say a ceramic filter or a gravity fed filter, often which are ceramic, and then you want to then deactivate any remaining pathogenic organisms with chlorine. So you could have a small portable pump filter, and then you could drop some chlorine tablets in your water bottle. That would be a portable method for your using. You know, the small Katadyn filters work quite well, and the soya filters work quite well, and then you can drop some chlorine in there as well, and that will deal with it. Again, follow the instructions with the chlorine. Contact time is important, and also my recent if you're dealing with it in the bottle itself, my recent video on remembering to flush the threads and leaving contact time there as well is important. So generally, coarse filtration and boiling, coarse filtration and a strong chemical agent such as chlorine dioxide, or microfiltration with a pump filter or a gravity filter. Pump filter's quicker, and then chlorine to deal with any remaining pathogenic organisms. So hopefully that serves you well. Hopefully that means that you can get water on the move, and hopefully that helps many other people as well. Okay, so that brings us to the end of episode 4 of Ask Paul Kirtley. Thanks for watching, thanks for sending all your questions in, thanks for making this popular. Keep the questions coming in. Remember to use the hashtag #AskPaulKirtley. Twitter's a really efficient way to send your questions in. It's easy for me to search on the hashtag #AskPaulKirtley. I get all the questions there in a stack and I can answer them in a batch. That makes it really efficient for me. It makes it more likely I'm going to answer your question. Instagram as well. I'd love to get more questions via Instagram. If you're not already following me on Instagram, here's a link in the YouTube video here, also in the show notes on my blog. And if you're listening or watching not on YouTube, then go to my blog, look at the show notes, there's a link to my Instagram there. Now what you need to do is, you don't even need to send it to me on Instagram, you just need to post a photograph. Post a photograph of yourself, or post a photograph of your camp, or you in your camp. That's a really good way of doing it. And then leave me a question underneath, and with the Ask Paul Kirtley hashtag. Remember to put that in, because then I can search Instagram for Ask Paul Kirtley and I'll find your post and I'll feature it in one of my upcoming shows. So if you want to get your question featured, if you want to get a picture of you or your camp in my show coming up, Ask Paul Kirtley and ask the question in one of your posts on Instagram. Also, the SpeakPipe facility on my blog. Go to my blog, go to the tab at the top that says Ask Paul, scroll down, there's a nice button in the middle of the page there, press that, speak into the microphone on your device, whether it's your laptop or your phone, and leave me a voicemail, just as Adrian did in this show. That's a really good way. It's nice to hear people's voice. It mixes things up as well, and it's a really efficient way of getting a question to me. Not so many people are using that so far, and I try and feature those in the show. So if you really want to get your question featured, use the SpeakPipe facility. And then if you want to stay old school and send me an email, you can do that, but just make sure you put Ask Paul Kirtley in the message heading or in the body of the message, because that will go into a separate folder in my inbox, ready for me to read through all the questions when I'm ready to make one of these shows. And that again increases the chances of you getting your question into my show. What I don't want people doing is leaving comments on posts that I make on social media, asking me a question. It's almost impossible for me to find those after the fact. You know, I need to, when I make these shows, I need to go and find the questions. If you've buried it somewhere in some comments somewhere, it's difficult for me to find those questions. Also, if you don't use the hashtag, I'm not going to find it. So send your own post, post your own post, use the hashtag Ask Paul Kirtley. One other thing, I've had quite a few questions asking me to demonstrate things. This is a Q&A session. I sit in front of the camera and talk, and that's in place of me answering tweets and answering emails. So I'm not going to be demonstrating skills on this. I've had a few questions using compasses, folding tarps. I can certainly make videos about those at some point in the future, so do send in suggestions, but they're going to have to be how-to videos. This is not a how-to series, this is a Q&A informational series where I answer people's questions more efficiently than I can answer emails, and get that information out to a wider audience than just the one person who might get the email or the response to the tweet. Also, I can't do ID sessions here. People are sending me blurry pictures of fungi, pictures of plants. It's completely out of context of the environment. It's out of context, the time of year potentially even. With fungi, you've got to look at the trees that are present as well, because there's often a symbiotic relationship with the trees. The smell is important, consistency and texture is important. Same with plants. Plants are a bit easier to do by photography. Fungi, I'm not going to answer fungi ID questions if you're going to send me a photograph. What you're going to need to do if you want to learn about fungi is join a local fungi group, join a local mycology group, buy a mycology guide and learn as you go. It's not a quick process. There isn't a quick route, particularly with fungi. There are over 4,000 species of fungi in the UK alone. It takes a while to learn even the most common ones, and you need to be safe with them. So sending the occasional photograph into somebody to get it ID'd is not the safe way to do it. Learn yourself, go and learn in person from somebody who knows. I'd be happy to teach you what I know if you were here, but you know, given the format, it's not the right format for it. Similar with tree and plant ID. If you want to learn about tree and plant ID, come and do my course that I open once a year. Get the guides that are recommended on my blog in the resources section, and get out there and look at what's there and learn again as you go. Make notes, learn to recognize the common species which are in your area. Great question today. Exactly, that's what you should be doing. Don't send in random pictures to me, particularly if they're blurry, out of focus ones. I just can't answer those questions, I'm sorry. It's not the appropriate way to get the right answer. So thanks for watching this, thanks for making it popular. If I could ask you one favour now, just at the end, please share this with people that you think will find it useful. And whether you're listening to this on SoundCloud, watching it on YouTube, watching it on my blog, watching it on Facebook, however you're consuming this and getting the information, please share it with people that you think that will find it interesting. Share it on Facebook, share it on Twitter, share it in a forum or a group that you're a member of. Share it with your peer group that like the things that you're interested in, and that would be interested in consuming this information. This good information I'm putting out is a result of the great questions that you're sending in. So please keep sending the questions in. I'll keep answering your questions. I'll keep making these shows. People seem to really like them, and I will see you on the next one. Take care.